The dust hung thick in the air as Tucker Dean stared down the barrel of a Colt .45, her trembling fingers leaving no doubt this was the first time she'd aimed to kill. The year was 1873, and in Silverwater, Colorado, survival often meant choosing between your conscience and your heartbeat. Tucker brushed a strand of auburn hair from her face, her green eyes never leaving the man sprawled on the ground before her. Blood seeped through his shirt where she'd managed to wing him with her first shot, but Jeremiah Kane, the man who'd murdered her father, was still very much alive and smiling up at her with yellowed teeth. "You ain't got it in you, girl," Kane sneered, pressing a hand to his wounded shoulder. "Your daddy didn't neither. That's why he's feeding the worms." Tucker's finger tightened on the trigger. 6 months ago, she'd been teaching at a proper school back east, content with her books and lessons. Now here she stood, dust on her hemline and revenge in her heart, in this godforsaken mining town where her father had summoned her only to die 3 days after her arrival. "Stand down, miss." The deep voice came from behind, steady as stone. Tucker didn't turn, couldn't afford to take her eyes off Kane. "This isn't your fight, stranger," she replied, her voice surprisingly level despite the hammering of her heart. "No," the voice agreed, closer now, "but killing a man, even scum like Kane, ain't something that washes off easy." From the corner of her eye, Tucker caught a glimpse of the stranger, tall, broad-shouldered, with a weather-beaten Stetson and a revolver that hung at his side like it belonged there. Not drawn, just present. "A warning." "He killed my father," Tucker said, her voice breaking on the last word. "I know," the stranger replied, and something in his tone made Tucker finally look at him fully. "Wade Zimmerman, U.S. Marshal. Been tracking Kane for 3 months. He's wanted in 4 territories." Wade Zimmerman cut an imposing figure against the setting sun. His face was tanned and lined from years under harsh elements, but his blue eyes held a clarity that made Tucker feel suddenly transparent. A thick mustache framed his upper lip, and a thin scar ran from his right ear to the edge of his jaw. "You can put that gun down now, Miss Dean," he said quietly. "Justice will be served." "How do you know my name?" Tucker asked, the gun still trained on Kane. "Your father was helping me build a case against Kane and his gang when he was killed," Wade said. "Edmund Dean was a good man." Kane spat in the dust. "Marshal's been chasing his tail for months. Ain't got nothing that'll stick. That right?" Wade's voice remained calm as he pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket. "Found this in your saddlebag while you were busy threatening the lady. Detailed ledger of every stagecoach job, every name, every dollar. Your own handwriting, Kane." The outlaw's face strained of color. "Now, Miss Dean," Wade continued, his eyes never leaving Tucker's, "you can shoot him and spend the rest of your days knowing you've become what you hate, or you can let me take him in. Your father would want you to choose life." Tucker's hands shook violently now, tears blurring her vision. The weight of the gun seemed suddenly unbearable. "He didn't even give my father a chance," she whispered. "I know," Wade replied. "That's what makes you better than him." Slowly, painfully, Tucker lowered the gun. In a flash, Wade had Kane's hands bound behind him, hauling him to his feet with practiced efficiency. "You made the right choice," Wade said, tipping his hat to her as he marched Kane toward the jailhouse. Tucker stood rooted in the street long after they'd disappeared from sight, the setting sun casting long shadows across Silverwater's main thoroughfare. She had come west to honor her father's request, stayed to bury him, and now found herself adrift in a world so different from the schoolrooms of Boston that it might as well have been another planet. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. Her meager savings would last perhaps another month at Mrs. Holbrook's boarding house. After that, Tucker shook her head, tucking the Colt into the pocket of her skirt. One day at a time. That's all she could manage for now. The next morning found Tucker at the small graveyard on the outskirts of town, placing wildflowers on her father's simple marker. The morning air was cool and clean, the mountains to the west still shrouded in dawn's hazy light. Figured I might find you here. Tucker didn't need to turn to recognize Wade Zimmerman's voice. Marshal. He stepped beside her, had held respectfully in his hands. Kane's being transported to Denver today. Federal judge there will see he hangs. Tucker nodded, her eyes still on her father's grave. Thank you for stopping me yesterday. I wasn't. I'm not. A killer? Wade supplied. No, Miss Dean, you're not. That's a blessing, not a failing. They stood in silence for a moment before Tucker finally asked the question that had kept her awake much of the night. Did my father suffer? Wade's jaw tightened. Your father died protecting information that will help bring down not just Kane, but the entire Blackhawk gang. He died a hero, Miss Dean. It wasn't exactly an answer, which was answer enough for Tucker. She closed her eyes briefly against a fresh wave of grief. What will you do now? Wade asked quietly. Tucker gave a bitter laugh. I've been asking myself the same question. I can't afford passage back east, and even if I could, my position at the school has surely been filled by now. She sighed. I've been helping out at the general store. Mr. Peterson pays poorly, but it's honest work. Wade nodded, settling his hat back on his head. I'll be in town another day or two, finishing my report. If you think of anything else about your father's dealings with Kane that might help the case, I'm staying at the hotel. I will, Tucker said, though she knew there was nothing more she could offer. Her father had been secretive about his business ventures, perhaps with good reason. As Wade turned to leave, he hesitated. Miss Dean. I knew your father only briefly, but he spoke of you often. He was very proud of the woman you've become. The simple kindness broke something in Tucker, and tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. Wade respectfully looked away, giving her a moment to compose herself. Thank you, Marshal, she finally managed. Wade, he corrected gently. Just Wade. The next 2 days passed in a haze for Tucker. She worked at Peterson's general store during the day, mechanically stocking shelves and tallying purchases. At night, she returned to her small room at the boarding house and tried to make sense of her father's papers. Most were business documents. She didn't understand mining claims, property deeds, investment notes. Nothing that explained why he had asked her to leave her comfortable life to join him in this rough-edged town, only to be murdered days later. On the evening of the second day, a knock at her door startled her. Mrs. Holbrook, the landlady, never disturbed her tenants after dinner unless it was an emergency. Tucker opened the door to find Wade standing in the narrow hallway, his expression grave. May I come in for a moment, Miss Dean? There's a matter we need to discuss. Tucker hesitated. It wasn't proper to invite a man into her room, but the serious look in Wade's eyes overrode social convention. She stepped aside to let him enter. Wade removed his hat, looking uncomfortable in the small, feminine space. His eyes fell on the papers spread across her small table. Going through your father's affairs? He asked. Tucker nodded, trying to make sense of it all. He was never a wealthy man, at least not that I knew. He taught mathematics at the Boys' Academy in Boston until 2 years ago, when he suddenly resigned and moved west. She gestured helplessly at the papers. Now I find he owned mining shares property. It doesn't make sense. Wade seemed to choose his words carefully. Your father was more than he appeared, Miss Dean. That's partly why I'm here. The stagecoach transporting Kane to Denver was ambushed this morning about 10 miles outside of town. Tucker's hand flew to her mouth. He escaped. No, Wade said grimly. He's dead. Shot by his own men, it appears. Why would they kill him? To silence him, Wade said, his blue eyes hard as flint. Kane knew too much, and with the evidence we found, he might have turned on his partners for a reduced sentence. Tucker sank into the room's only chair. So it's over, then? Not quite, Wade said, taking a folded document from inside his vest. This was found on Kane's body. It appears to be a map to something called the Silverwater claim. Mean anything to you? Tucker shook her head. I've never heard of it. Look at the signature, Wade said, handing her the document. At the bottom of the yellowed paper, in familiar handwriting, was her father's name. I don't understand, Tucker said, her hands trembling slightly. What does my father have to do with any of this? Wade sighed heavily, leaning against the door frame. Your father approached me 6 months ago with information about the Black Hawk gang. He discovered they were using legitimate mining operations to launder money from their robberies. He became my informant, helping to track their operations. That's why he was killed, Tucker said, the pieces finally falling into place. But why would he ask me to come here? He must have known it was dangerous. Wade's expression softened. From what your father told me, Miss Dean, you are the most precious thing in his life. My guess is that he wanted to explain everything to you in person, maybe take you away somewhere safe once his work with me was done. Tucker stared at the map, her vision blurring with unshed tears. And now, Wade said, straightening up, I believe the Black Hawk gang thinks this map leads to something valuable, something your father hid. They killed Kane to keep him quiet, and they'll be coming for that map next. Tucker's head snapped up. Coming for it? But how would they know you have it? Wade's expression darkened. Because the men who ambushed the stagecoach were wearing badges, Miss Dean. Fake ones, but convincing enough to get close. Someone in law enforcement is working with the Black Hawk gang. A chill ran down Tucker's spine. Are you saying we can't trust the authorities? I'm saying we need to be careful who we trust, Wade corrected. Sheriff Miller is a good man, but even he doesn't know about your father's role as my informant. I'd like to keep it that way for now. What do we do? Tucker asked, her heart racing. We need to figure out what this map leads to, Wade said. And we need to do it before the gang realizes I brought it to you. Tucker looked down at the map again, studying it more carefully. The lines and markings meant little to her, but there was something familiar about a small symbol drawn in the corner, a triangle with a curved line through it. This symbol, she said, pointing. It's like a brooch my father gave me years ago. He said it was a family crest of sorts. Wade leaned closer, his shoulder nearly touching hers as he examined the mark. Could be significant. Do you still have the brooch? Tucker nodded, crossing to the small dresser and removing a wooden box from the top drawer. Inside was a silver brooch, tarnished with age, in the exact shape of the symbol on the map. Wade took it carefully, turning it over in his palm. This could be a key of some sort or a marker. He glanced up at Tucker. Miss Dean, I need to ask something difficult of you. It isn't safe for you to stay in Silverwater. Not now. I believe we need to follow this map, see where it leads, and find what your father wanted to protect. Tucker stared at him, the full weight of his words sinking in. You want me to leave with you? Just like that. I know it's improper and sudden, but improper? Tucker laughed bitterly. Marshal Zimmerman. I'm alone in a strange town. My father has been murdered, and apparently dangerous men may soon be looking for me. Propriety is the least of my concerns. A ghost of a smile touched Wade's lips. Fair point. We'll leave at first light. Pack only what you can carry on horseback. And Miss Dean? Yes. Tell no one where you're going. As far as anyone in Silverwater is concerned, you're returning east to be with family. After Wade left, Tucker sat on the edge of her narrow bed, her mind racing. In the span of a week, her entire world had been upended. Now she was preparing to leave with a man she barely knew, chasing a mystery her father had left behind. She should be terrified. Instead, beneath the anxiety and grief, she felt something unexpected stirring a sense of purpose. For the first time since receiving her father's letter asking her to join him in Colorado, Tucker felt she might finally understand what had driven him west. Whatever secret lay at the end of that map, her father had deemed it important enough to risk his life for. The least she could do was discover what it was. Dawn came too quickly. Tucker had barely slept, spending most of the night sorting through her belongings, deciding what she could take and what must be left behind. In the end, her life fit into one carpet bag and a small leather satchel containing her father's papers. She left a note for Mrs. Holbrook along with 2 weeks' rent, explaining that a family emergency had called her back east. It wasn't entirely a lie. Her father's unfinished business was indeed a family emergency of sorts. Wade was waiting at the livery stable with 2 horses, his own sturdy buckskin gelding and a smaller, dappled mare for Tucker. "You know how to ride?" he asked as she approached, noting her practical split riding skirt with approval. "My father insisted I learn as a girl," Tucker replied, stroking the mare's soft nose. "Though it's been some years." "She's gentle," Wade assured her, helping Tucker secure her bags to the saddle. "Name's Penny. She'll treat you well if you do the same for her." As they rode out of Silverwater, the rising sun at their backs, Tucker cast one last glance at the small town that had briefly been her home. She couldn't help wondering if she'd ever see it again. "Where exactly are we headed?" she asked as they followed the main trail westward. Wade pulled the map from his saddlebag, studying it in the growing light. "From what I can tell, these markers correspond to landmarks in the Silverton Mountains, about 3 days' ride from here." He pointed to a series of peaks visible in the distance. "Your father's claim appears to be here, near Summit Creek." "And what do you think we'll find there?" Tucker asked, adjusting her hat against the brightening sun. Wade's expression was guarded.
"Hard to say.
Could be a mine, could be something else entirely. Whatever it is, the Black Hawk gang wants it badly enough to kill for it." They rode in companionable silence for much of the morning, the rhythmic sound of hoofbeats and the occasional call of a hawk the only sounds breaking the vast stillness of the landscape. Tucker found herself studying Wade when he wasn't looking the straight line of his shoulders, the confident way he sat a horse, the watchful alertness that never seemed to leave him even in these empty stretches. He was handsome in a rugged, understated way that was entirely different from the polished gentleman of Boston society. There was nothing pretentious about Wade Zimmerman. What you saw was what you got, and what you got was solid as the mountains themselves. By midday, they stopped to rest the horses beside a small creek. Tucker stretched her stiff muscles, already feeling the effects of hours in the saddle. "We're making good time," Wade commented, filling their canteens from the clear running water. "Should reach Miller's Pass by nightfall." "Is there a town there?" Tucker asked hopefully, thinking of a real bed and a hot meal. Wade shook his head. "Just an old trapper's cabin I've used before. It's not much, but it's shelter." As they ate a simple lunch of jerky and hardtack, Wade asked, "Tell me about your life back east, Miss Dean. Your father mentioned you were a teacher?" Tucker nodded, grateful for the conversation to distract her from her aching body. "At the Kensington School for Girls in Boston. I taught literature and history to young ladies of good families." She smiled at the memory. It was a good position. Respectable. "You sound like you miss it," Wade observed. Tucker considered this. "I miss the books, the discussions, the order of it all." She glanced around at the wild, open country surrounding them. "Everything here is so untamed." "That's what I love about it," Wade said, his eyes scanning the horizon.
"No pretense."
"Just the truth of what you are against the truth of the land." "And what are you, Marshal Zimmerman?" Tucker asked impulsively. Wade looked at her then, his blue eyes holding hers for a long moment. "Just a man trying to bring a little justice to places that don't see much of it." He stood abruptly, dusting off his pants. "We should get moving. I don't like being in the open too long." As they continued their journey, Tucker found herself watching the land change around them. The open plains gradually gave way to rolling foothills, and by late afternoon, they were climbing into pine-covered slopes that filled the air with a fresh, resinous scent. The sun was setting when they finally reached the trapper's cabin, a small, sturdy structure nestled in a protected hollow. Wade dismounted first, approaching the cabin cautiously with his hand near his gun. "Wait here," he instructed Tucker, disappearing inside the darkened doorway. A moment later, he emerged. "All clear. It's dusty, but it'll do for the night." The cabin was indeed dusty, with cobwebs in the corners and a musty smell that spoke of long abandonment. Still, it had a stone fireplace, a small table with 2 rickety chairs, and a narrow cot in the corner. "I'll sleep outside," Wade said firmly before Tucker could protest about the sleeping arrangements. "Need to keep watch anyway." While Wade tended to the horses, Tucker busied herself sweeping out the worst of the dust and cobwebs. She found an old iron pot that would serve to heat water from the nearby stream, and soon had a small fire crackling in the fireplace. By the time Wade returned, Tucker had managed to prepare a humble but hot meal of beans and salt pork from their provisions. Wade looked surprised as he entered to find the cabin transformed, still humble, but clean, warm, and smelling of food. "You didn't have to do all this," he said, removing his hat. "I'm not helpless, Marshal," Tucker replied with a slight smile. "Even Boston schoolteachers know how to make a fire." They ate in companionable silence, the weight of the day's journey settling over them both. After they'd finished, Wade spread the map on the table between them, weighing down the corners with stones. "I've been thinking about this mark," he said, pointing to the symbol that matched Tucker's brooch. "It appears in 3 different places on the map. Here, near what I believe is Summit Creek. Here, by this formation that looks like Devil's Backbone. And here, where your father has written home."
Home.
Tucker frowned. "But my father's home was in Boston, until he came west." "Maybe it's symbolic," Wade suggested. "Or maybe home means something else entirely." Tucker pulled out the silver brooch, running her thumb over its worn surface. "When my father gave me this, he told me it would always lead me home if I was lost." She had thought it a poetic sentiment at the time. Now she wondered if it had been something more. "Get some rest," Wade said, folding the map carefully. "We have a long ride tomorrow." Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Tucker. The cot was hard, the night sounds unfamiliar, and her mind refused to quiet. After an hour of restless tossing, she rose and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, stepping outside to get some air. Wade sat on a fallen log near the small campfire he'd built, his rifle across his knees. He looked up at her approach, but didn't seem surprised. "Can't sleep?" he asked, making room for her on the log. Tucker shook her head, sitting beside him. Too much to think about. Above them, the sky was a vast canvas of stars, more than Tucker had ever seen in the smoke-hazed skies of Boston. The Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a ribbon of light. "It's beautiful," she breathed, tilting her head back to take in the spectacle. "One of the reasons I could never live in a city," Wade agreed. "Can't see the stars properly." They sat in silence for a while, the crackling fire the only sound besides the occasional distant call of a coyote. "Tell me about my father," Tucker finally said. "The part of him I didn't know." Wade studied the fire, considering his words carefully. "Your father was a brave man. Principled. When he discovered what the Blackhawk gang was doing using his mathematical expertise to launder their stolen money through mining investments, he could have looked the other way. Many would have. Instead, he came to me. How did he even get involved with such people?" Tucker asked, struggling to reconcile this image with the scholarly father she knew. "From what he told me, it started innocently enough. He was hired to manage some mining investments for what he thought was a legitimate business consortium. By the time he realized what was really happening, he was in deep." Wade paused. "He worried about you constantly. Wanted to make things right before bringing you out here." Tucker blinked back tears. "Why didn't he just come home? We could have gone somewhere else, started over." "The Blackhawk gang isn't known for letting people walk away," Wade said grimly. "Your father knew that." He thought if he could help bring them down, you'd both be safe afterward. He hesitated, then added gently, "He left letters for you. In Denver, with my superior. Said if anything happened to him, you were to have them." "Letters?" Tucker's heart leaped. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because they're only part of what he left for you," Wade replied. "There's something else, something important enough that he encoded its location in this map. I believe we need to find whatever's at the end of this trail before we retrieve those letters. They might not make sense otherwise." Tucker stared into the fire, processing this. "You think whatever is at this Silverwater claim will explain everything?" "I hope so," Wade said. "For your sake." The following morning dawned clear and cool. They set out early, climbing higher into the mountains where the air grew thin and crisp. Tucker found herself breathing hard, unaccustomed to the altitude, but she pushed on without complaint. The scenery was breathtaking, towering pines giving way to rocky outcroppings, with distant snow-capped peaks gleaming in the sunlight. By midday, Wade announced they were approaching the first marker on the map, Devil's Backbone, a serrated ridge of stone that did indeed resemble a spine rising from the earth. "According to the map, we should find something at the base of that formation," Wade said, pointing to a particularly sharp spire of rock. "Something marked with your father's symbol." They tethered the horses and continued on foot, picking their way carefully across the rocky terrain. Tucker's eyes scanned every surface, looking for anything that might match the triangular symbol. "There," she finally called, pointing to a boulder that seemed unremarkable until viewed from a certain angle. Carved into the stone, weathered but still visible, was the triangle with its curved line. Wade examined the carving, running his fingers over the worn edges. "It's old. Older than your father's involvement, I'd guess." "What does that mean?" Tucker asked, puzzled. Wade frowned in concentration. "I'm not sure. But according to the map, we need to follow this ridge northward for about a mile." The going was rough, the ground uneven and treacherous in places. Wade offered his hand to Tucker more than once to help her over particularly difficult stretches, his grip strong and reassuring. By late afternoon, they reached a small plateau overlooking a dramatic valley. "Summit Creek," Wade said, pointing to the silver ribbon of water visible far below. "And there," he indicated a stand of aspens near a rocky outcropping. "That matches the second marker on the map." It would be too dangerous to attempt the descent before nightfall, so they made camp on the plateau. As Tucker helped gather firewood, she couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. "Marshal," she said quietly when they were both near the campfire, "do you think we're being followed?" Wade didn't look up from where he was arranging stones around the fire pit, but his voice was tight.
"Yes."
"Since midday. At least 2 riders, keeping their distance." Tucker's heart hammered in her chest.
"Black Hawk Gum?"
"Likely," Wade said grimly. "We'll need to move before dawn. Try to lose them in the descent to Summit Creek." Tucker slept fitfully that night, waking at every sound. Long before first light, Wade gently shook her shoulder. "Time to go," he whispered. "Leave everything except what's essential. We need to travel light and fast." They packed quickly in the pre-dawn darkness, taking only water, some food, and the precious map. The horses sensed their tension, shifting nervously as Wade and Tucker mounted. "Stay close," Wade instructed as they set off at a careful walk, navigating by the faint light of a waning moon. The trail down is steep and narrow in places. As the first hint of dawn touched the eastern sky, they began their descent into the valley. The trail, little more than a game path in places, switchbacked down the mountainside, requiring their full concentration. Tucker's thighs ached from gripping the saddle, and her hands were sore from maintaining constant tension on the reins. They were halfway down when a rifle shot cracked through the morning stillness, sending birds scattering from the trees. The bullet struck rock just ahead of Wade's horse, causing the animal to rear in alarm. "Ride!" Wade shouted, drawing his revolver and firing back toward the ridge above them. "Get to the trees." Tucker kicked Penny into motion, leaning low over the mare's neck as they plunged down the trail. Behind her, more shots rang out, followed by the thunder of hooves. Wade was close behind, his buckskin scrambling down the steep path with remarkable agility. The aspen grove seemed impossibly far away. Tucker's heart pounded in rhythm with Penny's hooves as they galloped across the valley floor, the sound of pursuit growing closer with each passing moment. They reached the trees just as another volley of shots tore through the leaves around them. Wade caught up to Tucker, grabbing Penny's bridle to lead both horses deeper into the grove, where the trunks grew more densely. "Dismount," he ordered, sliding from his own saddle and pulling Tucker down beside him. "Stay low and follow me." They crouched among the white-trunked trees, leading the horses through the undergrowth. The aspens gave way to taller pines that offered better cover. Behind them, Tucker could hear men calling to each other as they entered the grove. "There," Wade whispered, pointing to a dark opening in a rocky outcropping ahead of them. "Looks like a mine entrance. Might be our best chance." They secured the horses in a natural hollow, hidden from casual view, then made their way to the mine entrance. It was old, the timber supports weathered and sagging, but still intact. Wade drew his revolver, peering into the darkness. "Stay behind me," he said, stepping cautiously into the tunnel. The air inside was cool and damp, smelling of earth and minerals. Wade struck a match, revealing a narrow passageway that extended deep into the mountainside. The walls were roughly hewn, supported every few yards by timber frames. "Silver mine," Wade murmured, noting the glittering veins visible in the rock walls. "Abandoned, but not cleaned out." They moved deeper into the tunnel, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind them. After about 50 yards, the passage opened into a larger chamber where mining equipment lay scattered picks, shovels, an old ore cart on rusted rails. "Look," Tucker whispered, pointing to a familiar mark carved into one of the support beams. The triangle with its curved line. Wade examined the carving, then looked around the chamber with newfound interest. "This must be it, the Silverwater claim." Tucker ran her fingers over the symbol. "But what was my father protecting here? It's just an abandoned mine." Wade was studying the chamber more carefully now, his eyes narrowed in concentration. Maybe not just a mine. He crossed to the far wall where a heap of canvas and old timbers lay in apparent disarray. Moving them aside revealed another, smaller tunnel. "This wasn't part of the original mining operation," Wade said, crouching to examine the opening. "This was dug later, and deliberately hidden." Tucker joined him, peering into the dark passage. "What do you think is in there?" "One way to find out," Wade replied, striking another match and ducking into the narrow tunnel. The secondary passage was short, opening after about 20 feet into a small, roughly circular room. Wade's match illuminated what appeared to be a camp of sorts of bedroll, some provisions, a lantern hanging from a hook in the ceiling, and, against the far wall, a heavy wooden chest. "Someone's been living here," Tucker whispered, looking around in amazement. "Recently." Wade lit the lantern, casting the small space in a warm glow. "Not living. Visiting." He crossed to the chest, examining its heavy iron lock. "This is what your father was protecting." Tucker approached the chest, and as she did, she noticed something else, a small wooden box sitting atop it. The box was carved with the now familiar triangle symbol. "This is for me," she said with certainty, picking up the box. It was lightweight, with no lock, just a simple latch. Inside was a letter, the paper yellowed but well-preserved, and a small key. "It's my father's handwriting," Tucker said, her voice thick with emotion as she unfolded the letter. "My dearest Tucker, if you are reading this, then I have failed to complete the work I began, and for that, I am more sorry than words can express. I never meant for you to be drawn into this dangerous business, but perhaps it was inevitable. You have always been your father's daughter, too clever and too principled for your own good. The key enclosed will open the chest before you. Inside is evidence I have gathered over the past year: ledgers, correspondence, banking records that proves the extent of the Blackhawk Gang's operations and identifies every member, including those who hide behind badges and respectability. More importantly, the chest contains nearly $50,000 in cash and gold money stolen from good people that I have been quietly recovering. This money is blood-stained, Tucker. It cannot be kept. But it can be returned to those who have suffered at the gang's hands. There is a list included of the victims and what is owed to each. I entrust this task to you and to Marshal Zimmerman, whom I have come to trust as one of the few honest lawmen in these territories. The brooch I gave you years ago was always meant to lead you here if something happened to me. It is more than a family symbol. It is the mark of a secret society that has fought corruption in the West for decades. I was proud to join their ranks, as my father did before me. Your mother never knew of this part of my life, and I regret the secrets I kept from both of you. But some burdens are not meant to be shared with those we love most. Be careful, my darling girl. The men who would kill for what's in this chest are powerful and without conscience. Trust Zimmerman. He will help you finish what I could not. With all my love, your father. Tucker's hands trembled as she finished reading the letter, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. All this time, she whispered, I never knew. Wade had read over her shoulder, his expression grave. Your father was a greater man than even I realized, he said quietly. May I see the key? Tucker handed it to him, watching as he knelt before the chest and inserted the small key into the lock. It turned with a solid click, and the heavy lid lifted to reveal stacks of banknotes, small bags of gold coins, and several leather-bound ledgers. Everything we need to bring down the entire Blackhawk operation, Wade said with quiet satisfaction. Names, dates, amounts, it's all here. A noise from the main tunnel made them both freeze, the unmistakable sound of footsteps and voices. They've found the mine, Wade whispered, quickly closing the chest. We need to move these documents now. There's no other way out, Tucker said, looking around desperately. Wade was already emptying his saddlebags, stuffing the most important ledgers inside. Take these, he said, handing them to Tucker. And your father's letter. I'll create a diversion to draw them away from the tunnel entrance. When it's clear, get to the horses and ride north. There's a ranger station about 10 miles up Summit Creek. Ask for Captain Daniels, he's one of the good ones. What about you? Tucker asked, her chest tight with sudden fear. I'll be right behind you, Wade promised, checking his revolver. But the evidence has to get through no matter what. Your father died for this, Tucker. We can't let it be for nothing. The voices were growing closer. Wade extinguished the lantern, plunging them back into darkness. In the dimness, Tucker felt his hand briefly touch her cheek. Be careful, he whispered, and then he was gone, slipping back through the narrow tunnel. Tucker waited in the darkness, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain it would give away her position. From the main chamber, she heard Wade's voice ring out. U.S. Marshal, drop your weapons. Gunfire erupted, the sound deafening in the confined space. Tucker pressed herself against the wall, clutching the saddlebags to her chest. More shouting, more shots, then the sound of running feet and a commotion moving back toward the mine entrance. Gathering her courage, Tucker crept through the tunnel into the main chamber. It was empty now, though she could still hear gunfire from outside the mine. She moved swiftly to the entrance, peering carefully around the edge. The scene outside was chaos. Wade was crouched behind a boulder, exchanging fire with 3 men who had taken positions among the trees. As she watched, he broke cover long enough to fire twice, hitting one of the men who fell with a cry. It was her chance. While the remaining attackers focused on Wade, Tucker slipped out of the mine and ran in a crouch toward where they'd left the horses. Penny whinnied softly as Tucker approached, clearly agitated by the gunfire. "Sure, girl," Tucker soothed, quickly securing the saddlebags and untethering both horses. She mounted Penny, keeping hold of the buckskin's reins. The gunfire had stopped. Tucker hesitated, torn between the need to escape with the evidence and her desperate worry for Wade. Had he been hit? Captured? She couldn't leave without knowing. Leading both horses, Tucker circled wide through the trees, approaching the clearing from a different angle. What she saw made her blood run cold. Wade was on his knees, hands raised, with a gun pressed to the back of his head. A tall man in a sheriff's uniform stood over him, while another man searched Wade's pockets. "Where are the ledgers, Zimmerman?" the false sheriff demanded. "And the girl?" "We know she was with you." "Gone," Wade replied, his voice steady despite his desperate situation. "Long gone with everything you're looking for. It's over, Hollister. The evidence is already on its way to the federal authorities." The man called Hollister struck Wade hard across the face with his pistol. "You're lying. She wouldn't leave you behind." Wade spat blood onto the ground. "She's smarter than that. And a hell of a lot smarter than you." Tucker knew she had to do something. The saddlebags contained everything needed to bring these men to justice, but Wade would be dead long before help could arrive. Her hand went to her skirt pocket, where her father's Colt still rested. Taking a deep breath, Tucker tied both horses securely to a tree, then moved silently through the underbrush until she was within firing range of the clearing. Her hands were steady as she raised the revolver, sighting down the barrel at Hollister. It was different from her confrontation with Kane. This time, there was no hesitation, no moral quandary. These men would kill Wade without a second thought, and they would kill her too if they caught her. Sometimes survival meant choosing. Tucker squeezed the trigger. The recoil jarred her arm, but her aim was true. Hollister screamed as the bullet tore through his shoulder, causing him to drop his gun. The second man whirled in confusion, giving Wade the opening he needed to lunge forward, tackling him to the ground. Tucker fired again, deliberately wide, creating enough chaos and uncertainty about the number of attackers to give Wade the advantage. He wrestled the gun from the second man, knocking him unconscious with the butt of the weapon. "Wade," Tucker called, emerging from the trees with her gun still trained on the wounded Hollister, who was clutching his bleeding shoulder and cursing. Wade looked up, momentary surprise giving way to relief. "I told you to ride for the ranger station," he said, quickly binding Hollister's hands behind his back with the man's own belt. "I couldn't leave you," Tucker replied simply. The third attacker lay motionless where Wade's earlier shot had dropped him. Wade checked for a pulse, then shook his head grimly. "We need to move," he said, securing the unconscious man as well. There could be more of them. They loaded the prisoners onto their own horses, Wade leading Hollister's mount while Tucker handled the other. With the evidence secure and 2 high-ranking members of the Blackhawk gang in custody, they made their way north along Summit Creek toward the ranger station. The journey took most of the day. Hollister alternated between threats and offers of bribes, while his companion remained sullenly silent. By the time they reached the ranger station, a fortified outpost manned by a contingent of Texas Rangers who patrolled the border territories, both Tucker and Wade were exhausted. Captain Daniels proved to be exactly as Wade had described, an honest, no-nonsense lawman who took immediate custody of the prisoners and dispatched riders to arrest the remaining gang members named in Edmund Dean's ledgers. "You've done the territories a great service," Daniels told them that evening, after they had given their statements and secured the evidence. "This gang has been terrorizing the Southwest for years. With the names and evidence you've provided, we can finally put an end to their operations." Tucker was provided with a small private room in the station's living quarters, where she finally had a chance to bathe and change into clean clothes provided by the captain's wife. Her body ached from days in the saddle, and the enormity of all that had happened threatened to overwhelm her now that the immediate danger had passed. A soft knock at her door roused her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Wade standing there, similarly refreshed, with a tray of food and a bottle of whiskey. "Thought you might be hungry," he said, "and in need of a drink." "I know I am." Tucker smiled, stepping aside to let him enter. They sat at a small table by the window, sharing the simple meal of stew and bread as the sun set over the mountains. "Captain Daniels says we'll need to travel to Denver next week to testify," Wade said between bites. "After that, the federal authorities will handle the distribution of the recovered money to the victims, just as your father wished." Tucker nodded, absently touching the silver brooch pinned to her borrowed blouse. "I still can't believe all of this. My father, a secret society, the double life he led." She looked up at Wade. "Did you know? About the society, I mean?" Wade shook his head. "I'd heard rumors of a group working against corruption in the territories, but nothing concrete. Your father never mentioned it to me directly." He poured a small measure of whiskey for each of them. "What will you do now, Tucker? Once this is all over?" It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the simple intimacy of it warmed her more than the whiskey. "I don't know," she admitted. "I can't imagine going back to Boston now, to teaching proper young ladies about a world I barely understood myself." She met his eyes across the table. "What about you? Will you continue as a marshal?" Wade contemplated his glass. "I've been thinking about that. This case. It's changed things. Shown me how deep the corruption goes, even within the law I've sworn to uphold." He looked up at her. "Your father's letter mentioned victims who need to be made whole again. Maybe that's a more worthy cause than chasing outlaws who are just replaced by new ones as soon as they're caught." "What are you saying?" Tucker asked, her pulse quickening. "I'm saying maybe it's time for a change. Your father left a legacy, not just the evidence or the money, but the idea that justice is worth fighting for, even from outside the system." Wade hesitated, then added quietly, "I'd like to continue that work. And I'd like you to consider joining me." Tucker stared at him, surprised by the offer and by how much she wanted to accept it. "You want me as a partner?" Wade's blue eyes held hers. "I want you as whatever you're willing to be, Tucker Dean. Partner, friend." He trailed off, letting the unspoken possibility hang between them. Tucker felt a blush warm her cheeks. So much had happened in such a short time, and yet she couldn't deny the connection that had formed between them. Wade Zimmerman was unlike any man she'd ever known, honorable, direct, with a quiet strength that came from absolute conviction rather than bravado. "I think I'd like that," she said softly. "To continue my father's work, to help those who've been wronged." Wade's smile transformed his usually serious face. "It won't be an easy life," he warned, "or a conventional one." Tucker laughed, the sound surprising them both. "Marshal Zimmerman, I think we're well past conventional, don't you?" The next several days passed in a blur of activity as rangers came and went, bringing news of arrests throughout the territory. The evidence Edmund Dean had gathered proved even more comprehensive than they'd initially realized, implicating not only the active members of the Blackhawk Gang but several prominent businessmen and politicians who had profited from their crimes. True to Wade's prediction, they were summoned to Denver to testify before a federal judge. The journey took 4 days by stagecoach, during which Tucker had ample time to consider Wade's proposal. By the time they reached Denver, she had made her decision. They would continue her father's work together, using the connections and methods of the secret society he had belonged to. Wade had contacts throughout the territories from his years as a marshal, and Tucker brought her father's knowledge and her own keen intelligence to their partnership. After their testimony concluded, Wade took Tucker to meet his former superior, U.S. Marshal James Cooper, who had been safeguarding the letters Edmund Dean had left for his daughter. "Your father spoke of you often, Miss Dean," Cooper said as he handed Tucker a packet of letters tied with string. He was immensely proud of you and concerned for your future. These were to be delivered to you in the event of his death, along with this. Cooper placed a wooden box on his desk. Inside was a substantial amount of money, enough to give Tucker options freedom. He wanted you to have choices, Cooper explained. Whether to return east or to make a new life out here. He didn't want financial concerns to force your hand either way. Tucker was deeply touched by her father's foresight and care. That night, alone in her hotel room, she read through his letters, detailed accounts of his discoveries, his fears, and his hopes for her future. In the final letter, written just days before his death, he had penned words that brought both tears and resolve. Whatever path you choose, Tucker, walk it with courage and conviction. The world needs more people willing to stand for what's right, even when doing so is difficult or dangerous. If I have taught you nothing else, I hope I have taught you that. 2 weeks later, Tucker and Wade stood on the platform of the Denver train station, waiting to board the westbound train. They had spent the intervening time laying groundwork for their new venture, establishing a small detective agency that would specialize in helping those who had been victimized by powerful interests and had nowhere else to turn. Last chance to change your mind, Wade said, watching Tucker carefully. The eastbound train leaves in an hour. You could be back in Boston within the week. Tucker shook her head, smiling up at him. My mind is made up, Marshal. Or should I say, partner? Wade's expression softened as he looked at her. In the weeks they'd spent together, something had grown between them, something neither had put into words yet, but that was undeniably there in every shared glance, every brush of hands, every conversation that stretched late into the night. Tucker, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Are you sure about this? About all of it? She knew he wasn't just asking about their professional partnership. Tucker reached out, taking his hand in hers for the first time, not out of necessity or fear, but simply because she wanted to. I've never been more sure of anything, she said softly. The train whistle blew, calling passengers to board. Wade's fingers tightened around Tucker's, and for a brief, electric moment, she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he gently released her hand and picked up their bags. That's our cue, he said, his voice gruff with emotion. Best not keep the future waiting. As they found their seats on the train, Tucker knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. The path ahead might be uncertain, even dangerous at times, but she would walk it with purpose and with a companion whose strength and integrity matched her own. The train pulled away from the station, carrying them westward toward new horizons and new beginnings. Tucker Dean, once a proper Boston schoolteacher, now an agent of justice in the wild territories, smiled at the thought of how far she had come in such a short time. Beside her, Wade Zimmerman stared out the window, his profile etched against the late afternoon sun. He was a man of few words, expressing himself more through actions than speech. Yet in the quiet moments between them, in the trust he'd placed in her, in the respect with which he treated her mind and abilities, he had said everything that mattered. As the train picked up speed, Tucker took out her father's silver brooch, running her fingers over its familiar shape. A legacy, a purpose, a future, all contained in this simple symbol that had led her to the truth about her father and, ultimately, to the man sitting beside her. The journey ahead would not be easy, but then, nothing worthwhile ever was. Whatever challenges awaited them, they would face them together, partners in every sense of the word. 5 years later, the small town of Redemption, Colorado, had grown accustomed to the unusual couple who operated the Zimmerman and Dean agency from a modest office on Main Street. The man tall, imposing, rarely speaking except when necessary, and the woman educated, sharp-witted, with kind eyes that missed nothing, had become known throughout the region as champions of the wronged and forgotten. They lived in a cabin on the outskirts of town, a place that blended Wade's appreciation for simplicity with Tucker's love of books and beautiful things. Their professional reputation had grown steadily, attracting clients from as far away as San Francisco and St. Louis. On a warm summer evening, they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. 5 years of working side by side had deepened their connection in ways neither could have imagined that day on the Denver train platform. They had faced danger together, celebrated victories, mourned losses, and built a life that, while unconventional, was rich with purpose and mutual respect. Yet for all their closeness, for all they had shared, Wade remained in some ways as reticent as when they'd first met. Some habits, it seemed, died hard. "I received a letter today," Tucker said, breaking the comfortable silence. "From the widow Johnson in Wyoming. She wanted us to know that her children are thriving in school now that the ranch is profitable again." Wade nodded, a small smile touching his lips. The Johnson case had been particularly satisfying, a widow being systematically cheated by her late husband's business partner until Wade and Tucker uncovered the fraud and recovered her rightful property. "That's good," he said simply. "Real good." Tucker studied him in the fading light, this man who had become everything to her partner, protector, friend, and for the past 3 years, husband. Their wedding had been a quiet affair, attended only by a handful of close friends, including Captain Daniels and Marshal Cooper. Wade had been characteristically taciturn throughout the ceremony, speaking only when required by the minister. Even their courtship had been conducted largely in silence on Wade's part, his feelings expressed through actions rather than words. A book of poetry left on her desk. A wildflower placed beside her breakfast plate, his hand steadying her elbow as they walked down a muddy street. And on the night he had proposed, standing in this very spot as a summer storm rolled across the valley, he had simply held out a ring and waited, his blue eyes saying everything his lips could not. Tucker had accepted both the ring and the man, understanding that Wade Zimmerman's silence was not a lack of feeling but rather its opposite, emotions so deep and overwhelming that they defied articulation. She had learned to read his silences as fluently as any book, to understand the language of his touch, his gaze, his presence. Still, there were moments when she wished. "What is it?" Wade asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. Tucker smiled, shaking her head. "Nothing. Just thinking about how far we've come." Wade reached across the space between their chairs, taking her hand in his. His thumb traced the outline of her wedding ring, a simple gold band that matched his own. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly, a rare hint of vulnerability in his voice. Tucker turned to him, squeezing his hand. "Not a single one." As darkness settled over the valley, they remained on the porch, hands linked, comfortable in their shared silence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new cases, new opportunities to right wrongs and defend the defenseless. But for now, this moment of peace was enough. Later that night, as they prepared for bed, Tucker found herself watching Wade as he moved about their bedroom with the easy familiarity of long partnership. He caught her gaze in the mirror as he removed his shirt, raising an eyebrow in question. "Just admiring the view," she teased, earning a rare chuckle from her husband. Wade crossed to where she sat at her dressing table, placing his hands on her shoulders. Their eyes met in the mirror's reflection. 5 years today," he said softly. Tucker blinked in surprise. It was indeed the anniversary of their first meeting, the day she had held a gun on Jeremiah Kane and Wade had stepped into her life. She hadn't realized he kept track of such dates. "So it is," she agreed, touched that he remembered. Wade's hands tightened slightly on her shoulders, his expression growing serious. "Tucker," he said, her name emerging as little more than a whisper. There was something different in his voice, something she had never heard before. Tucker turned to face him, her heart suddenly racing. For a long moment, Wade simply looked at her, his blue eyes filled with an emotion so powerful it seemed to steal his breath. Then, with a tenderness that made her throat tighten, he spoke her name again just once, But in that single word was contained 5 years of partnership, of trust, of love that had grown deeper with each passing day. Tucker. She reached out and took his hand, understanding at last the gift he had given her, not just the protection of his strength or the steadiness of his character, but the precious treasure of his heart, expressed in the one way that, for Wade Zimmerman, was more meaningful than 1,000 flowery declarations. No other words were necessary. As she rose to meet him, Tucker knew that in his own way, Wade had told her everything she needed to hear. In the years that followed, the Zimmerman and Dean agency became legendary throughout the West. Their cases were as varied as the frontier itself: land disputes, missing persons, corporate corruption, and occasionally, tracking down those who believed themselves beyond the reach of conventional justice. Through it all, their partnership remained unshakable, each complementing the other's strengths. Tucker's keen mind and social skills balanced Wade's tracking abilities and unflinching courage. Together, they built not just a successful business, but a legacy of justice that extended far beyond their small corner of Colorado. Their cabin expanded to accommodate a growing library and, eventually, a nursery. The arrival of their daughter, Elizabeth Edmund Zimmerman, brought a joy neither had quite anticipated. Wade, to Tucker's amused surprise, proved to be an utterly devoted father, his usual reticence completely abandoned when it came to his little girl. On Elizabeth's 5th birthday, as they watched her playing with the pony Wade had surprised her with that morning, Tucker leaned against her husband's shoulder and reflected on the strange and wonderful journey that had brought them to this moment. "Did you ever imagine this would be your life?" she asked. "That day when you stopped me from shooting Kane?" Wade's arm tightened around her waist. "Not in my wildest dreams," he admitted. "I figured I'd die with a badge on my chest and no one to mourn me, but maybe Cooper." Tucker smiled, remembering the stern, closed-off Marshal who had entered her life that fateful day. "You've changed, Wade Zimmerman." "Had a good reason to," he replied, dropping a kiss on the top of her head as their daughter's laughter rang across the yard. "The best reason." Tucker knew he meant more than just Elizabeth. He meant the family they had created, the work they did together, the life they had built from the ashes of her father's death and the corruption they'd confronted. In that moment, watching her husband and daughter together against the backdrop of the Colorado mountains, Tucker felt a sense of completion that transcended anything she could have imagined as that frightened, grieving young woman who had once held a gun with trembling hands. The Wild West had tested them, shaped them, and ultimately given them a home and purpose far removed from Tucker's Boston schoolroom or Wade's lonely life as a wandering lawman. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and in a land still being tamed, there would surely be many. They would face them as they had faced everything since that first meeting, together. Wade turned to her then, his expression softening in that way that was reserved only for her and Elizabeth. The late afternoon sun caught in his eyes, turning them the color of the Colorado sky. "No regrets?" he asked, echoing his question from years before. Tucker smiled, taking his hand in hers. "Not a single one." As the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows across their land, they stood together watching their daughter, the living embodiment of their partnership, their love, their shared journey. In this life they had forged together, there was everything they had ever needed: purpose, family, and a love that had begun in danger and silence, but had blossomed into something neither had dared to dream possible. Not even in the wild, wild West.